Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kernahan Webb, and I am the director of the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility, and a professor here at Toronto Metropolitan University in the Law and Business Department. And for those of you who are patching in for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who are repeat customers, welcome back. Today we have a very intriguing session ahead of us. Knowing the tumultuous state of world affairs, a question facing all of us and definitely facing businesses on a day-to-day basis is, how do businesses navigate this evolving global business environment? And we're very, very fortunate to have Dr. Henty Durker, Chief Sustainability and Integrity Officer at a key Canadian multinational corporation, Atkins Ray Ellis, able to shed some light on exactly those issues. I should mention as well that all of these sessions are conducted in the spirit of constructive engagement. That is, really we're dedicated to answering the question of how can businesses optimally contribute to the economic, social, and environmental welfare of those who are potentially affected by their activities. Next slide, please. So Toronto Metropolitan University is located in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, as well as Europeans and all newcomers, have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And just to note that we used to be called Ryerson University, and we have changed our name to Toronto Metropolitan University, and we apologize in advance for any confusion in that respect. All Toronto Metropolitan University CSR Institute sessions are animated by this definition of social responsibility, which comes from the ISO 26000 social responsibility standard, which is a voluntary standard that was developed by a combination of government, intergovernmental bodies, the private sector, and civil society organizations from around the world. The actual standard is more than 100 pages long. It is a voluntary standard. This definition is just a tiny part of it, but given that it was hammered out by a multi-stakeholder group, including developing countries as well as developed country personnel, we find it to be a pretty good understanding of social responsibility. So the point being that social responsibility is all about the impacts of an organization's decisions and activities, both on society and on the environment. It's about being transparent and ethical. It's about contributing to sustainable development being concerning about not only development for the current generations, but also for future generations, contributing to health and welfare of society, taking into account the expectations of stakeholders. Note the word stakeholders is not the same as shareholders. Shareholders are clearly important examples of stakeholders, but community members, workers, consumers, governments, and so on are all stakeholders, is in compliance with applicable law and consistent with international norms of behavior, and is integrated throughout the organization and practiced in its relationships. And on that point of integrated throughout the organization and practiced in its relationships, it's critically important for what we're talking about here today, because this is, for example, your supply chain partners and the communities where you work with and your clients and customers, in addition to what you're doing internally with your own employees. Next slide, please. The second concept that animates everything that we do here at the CSR Institute is the concept of sustainable governance, which recognizes that we live in a fast evolving society, fast evolving technologically, also geopolitically, and in every other way. And we live in a world where what goes on in another jurisdiction can have a lot of impact on us, and we in turn can have a lot of impact on what other jurisdictions are doing. And so given this complexity, this fast evolution, this multi-jurisdictional environment, the challenges that we face, the conclusion reached according to the sustainable governance idea is that the best way of ensuring that we are properly addressing the economic, environmental, and social impacts of activities of organizations is by harnessing the unique energies and capabilities of all three of government, the private sector, and civil society. So yes, clearly government has got the hammer. It has the ability to coercively require through legislation that we all comply with whatever it is that government wants. But in addition, the private sector through the market has an incredible power, harnessing that market power to get good things done, to encourage good things being done by supply chain partners and so on. But also they can use that power through industry associations and standards and so on to discourage bad behavior of one sort or another. And then civil society, through their direct interactions with companies and governments and so on, as community members, as workers, as part of NGOs and so on, also have considerable power, I would call it normative power, to incentivize businesses to do the right thing and discourage them from doing the wrong thing. So oftentimes this involves collaboration among government, the private sector, and civil society, but it also involves, and this is important not to diminish, the important role played by rivalrous, check and balance, competitive elements. That oftentimes is what drives us to improve and it drives us to innovate. So we believe that it's this combination of things which are necessary to have a vital operating environment for all types of organizations, but we're focusing today on businesses. So underlying, next slide, please. Underlying sustainable governance is this idea that all three of government, the private sector, and civil society have got unique institutions, rule instruments, and processes, and their own unique actors, networks of actors around them that they can tap into and use in order to get good things done and to discourage bad things, as the case might be. Next slide, please. Just to note that we have other sessions coming up, some planned and some in the works. One of them coming up next week is meeting with a couple of gentlemen from Total operating in Nigeria, where they are in the process of implementing new legislation pertaining to impact benefit agreements. And impact benefit agreements are ways for businesses to directly connect to the communities where they operate and to develop appropriate sets of commitments and so on with those stakeholders. So that should be a very interesting session. I'm looking forward to that. And we're always on the lookout for new sessions. So please feel free to email me if you do have any suggestions for new sessions coming up. All of these sessions are available at no cost and are accessible after the fact as videos. Just go up to the CSR Institute webpage and you can see a list of all the previous sessions and the upcoming sessions. And for the previous sessions, you can see how you can access the videos there. We do a lot of interesting things here at Toronto Metropolitan University that pertain one way or the other to this topic. Those are kind of mentioned there below. And I just encourage you, if you do have any questions, feel free to email me if you do have any further questions in that regard. Next slide, please. So we're very fortunate to have Henty, who is a repeat guest to these CSR Institute sessions. His last session was excellent, and I know this one as well will be excellent. So he is now the Atkins-Raelis Chief Sustainability and Integrity Officer. In the past, as you can see there, he was occupying a similar position. We'll talk about the similarities and differences momentarily at Siemens Canada. And indeed, I'm sure that was one of the reasons why Atkins-Raelis hired him, was in order to benefit from his experience with Siemens in addressing these issues. A similarity that Siemens and Atkins-Raelis have is that both of them have had issues in the past with bribery and corruption, and have gone through very extensive exercises to address the limitations and weaknesses and put in place better systems, which is what we'll be talking about here. So we'll be talking more when we speak with Henty in a second here about his unique career path leading to him being a sustainability and compliance officer, but it's a very interesting story. So we'll get around to that. But part of that story is visible here in the sense of he has degrees, master's and doctoral degrees in engineering and management. And love this quote. Integrity is a cornerstone of how we operate, from maintaining robust internal controls and integrating best practices into our operations to providing consistent ongoing training for employees. So we'll definitely be unpacking that superb, compact sort of description of what it is you do, Henty. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background on Atkins-Raelis. It was created by the combining of Atkins, FNG, and SNC-Lavalin. It is a company that is basically involved in engineering services and nuclear activities. Describes itself as creating sustainable solutions that connect people, data, and technology. I'm not going to read the rest of it there, but you can see it's quite a comprehensive statement, and quite a good statement in the sense of giving you an idea of the array of things that Atkins-Raelis does. And the next point, the fact that it operates in over 50 countries, over 37,000 employees, representing 130 plus nationalities, speaking 70 plus languages, is, I think, one of those key factors of multinational corporations, which really is one where I think a lot of people need to understand how is it exactly that when you operate in such different climates from one country to another, both from a temperature standpoint and a geo standpoint, but also economic, legal, governing. How is it that you, in one multinational form, can ensure comprehensive compliance on issues and integrity, given that diversity of employees, of workforces, and of operating environments? Again, that's the challenge facing multinationals, and Henty is ideally positioned to talk about that. So as the next bullet says, geopolitical changes are introducing new, fragmented, or even conflicting regulations and policies across different jurisdictions, increasing compliance costs and the risk of non-compliance penalties. And that is indeed the operating environment we were just talking about. And then the final point, given its past history of governance issues, fraud and corruption charges and convictions and settlements and so on, when it was SNC-Lavalin, Atkins-Raelis faces heightened scrutiny to maintain a strong culture of integrity and responsible governance, especially when dealing with public sector contracts and third parties in politically sensitive environments. And indeed, much of the work of companies such as Atkins-Raelis are with public sector clients, and they represent their own unique challenges in their own right. So next slide, please. just a final point, and that is we do have people patching in from, I know, as far off as South Asia and South America, as well as in Europe, and greatly appreciating you getting up at odd times of the day and night in order to patch in. So wherever it is you are, and we do have people from private sector, government, civil society organizations, academics, students, please feel free to email me with questions, and I will do my best to fold those in while we are having our chat. So with that, welcome, Henty.
Thanks, Gunnigan. I really appreciate the invitation and looking forward to the chat.
Let us start, if you don't mind, with going back to the very beginning. And you really do have a very interesting story to tell. How is it that a little boy playing in a sandbox somewhere in South Africa looked up at his mom and dad and said, Mom, Dad, when I grow up, what I would like to be is the Chief Sustainability and Compliance Officer at a Canadian multinational corporation? I'm imagining that was not the thoughts and the first things that came to mind when you lifted your head up from their sandcastles and shovels and so on. But please do tell us that story.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll keep to the high level. And speaking of high level, my aspiration always was to become a pilot. Luckily, I didn't go down that route because I get really air sick or motion sick. So I don't enjoy flying. So that might have been a good piece that didn't happen. I always wanted to become an engineer then after that. And I joined Siemens as a bursary student. They paid for my studies to study electrical electronic engineering. Started working for them, worked on power stations. And one day I decided power stations are dirty and hot. And the sales guys that sell stuff seems to be enjoying it much better, and they can entertain customers and clients. I want to do that. And my advice always to people joining companies is make sure that you tell people what your aspirations are and where you want to go and what you want to do, because the more people that know that you want to make a change, the easier is it for them to think, oh, Henty said he wants to move into sales and marketing. We've actually got a role for him. Let's try that. And that's how I got into sales and marketing. Worked with a lot of distribution agreements, distributors, OEM networks within South Africa. And then the Siemens scandal broke, and they were looking for a project manager to project manage the implementation of a compliance system within the Southern African region. And they tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, are you interested in that? And I said, great. And I started doing that. I really love the corporate kind of overview that you have in a company, because suddenly you see everything. Fast forward a couple of years, I wanted to move out of South Africa. And again, people knew, and there was a slot open in Canada for Siemens as their regional compliance officer. And I came over, and Siemens brought me over to Canada to become the regional compliance officer, which I really enjoyed. I stayed there for a couple of years. Siemens did work for SNC-Lavalin back in the day. The SNC-Lavalin scandal broke. I phoned up SNC-Lavalin and said, hey, can I speak to your compliance officer? Which at that point they didn't have one. But started to speak to the head of internal audit and HR and try to see, what are they doing to change the culture and implement a program to make sure that from a Siemens perspective we don't get dragged into this scandal. Again, fast forward a couple of years, SNC-Lavalin then contacted me and say, hey, do you want to become our chief compliance officer for the company? And from a career development perspective, I always wanted to work at a headquarters. For Siemens, if I wanted to work at headquarters, I had to move to Germany, which was actually in the plans, but then it fell through. And then I got to join SNC-Lavalin, based in Montreal, and became the chief compliance officer. At that point in time, there were already a couple of years into changing the company and putting programs and controls in place, which was based on the Siemens system. So that was one of the reasons, I think, why I was tapped to join the company. And that was in October 2015. And I think we did a really great job. We worked through a lot of monitorships. We've improved the program, the controls. I've got a great team from a program perspective through to an investigations team and program controls and and training. And in 2021, our CEO and CFO started getting a lot of questions around ESG. And I think as a company, we soon realized that we weren't equipped to answer all these questions in a as eloquent or adequate way. So again, they came to me, tapped my shoulder, and say, "Hey, can you do what you did for the compliance program for an ESG program, to make sure that we have robust controls and programs in place, so that when we talk about metrics, when we talk about our achievements, that we are comfortable that they are based in robust assurance activities, and that we're saying the true things, that we're not greenwashing anything." So that started in 2021, and it's been a great and wonderful kind of journey over the past couple of years, building up the ESG, which is now called sustainability, and we can talk a little bit about that when we talk about geopolitical, changes in the world. And how we've kind of built a whole control framework around that, and how we report about it, how do we disclose about that, and then also how, as a company, we decide on what to focus on our efforts on as it relates to sustainability. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of my career from early 90s up to today.
Well, Henty, it's a interesting career path with many kind of zigs and zags. But what's very interesting about those zigs and zags is that you have had experience with Siemens originally on the sales side, which we could call the direct profit making side, and then you moved over to the guardrail side. How do you ensure, while making a profit, that you at the same time are doing it in a way whereby you're not getting into any sort of problems at the same time? And I will circle back to that, but I do think that the fact that you have had your feet on both sides of that coin, so to speak, is highly advantageous in terms of your ability to speak to, for example, the salespeople within within AtkinsRéalis, prior to that within Siemens Canada, because you have some, I can relate to you and you can relate to me. I understand your work, and you therefore should be able to understand now I'm on the other side, and here's why. But we'll come back to that point. I do think it's a critically important one. But I just want to mention one other thing, and that is that we're fortunate to have here today, in addition to yourself, a PhD student of mine, Zachar Khan, who did his master's thesis on the Siemens Canada approach to addressing bribery and corruption after the Siemens problems that they had with bribery and corruption. And he benefited, as did I, from our interactions with you there. And so we're kind of following you along. But Zachar is continuing his plumbing of this topic of how do companies address their various different environmental, social, and economic impacts. But whereas his master's thesis was kind of looking specifically only within the company, now he's adopting a more broader approach to understand how the interactions of companies such as AtkinsRéalis interact with governments and so on. So I wanted to bring him on because he is an excellent student. He has got a direct interest in what we're talking about here today, and he also has very good insights and questions. So I'm encouraging Zachar to leap in wherever he sees a need to pursue a spot in a little bit more detail. Well, let's circle back then to the decision-making process within AtkinsRéalis. You have a very interesting role, and if we were to talk about an org chart, who you report to, your title, your responsibilities, what you mean by integrity, what you mean by compliance. And when I say you, what does Atkins Realis mean by that? Let's just start with that, the kind of the lay of the land within Atkins Realis on the issue of integrity and compliance.
Sure. And something maybe just for everybody in the back of their minds to keep in mind, the purpose of our company. I think we've got a great purpose. We reinvented the purpose and our values back in 2017, 2018 when we acquired the Atkins piece of our business, is to engineer a better future for our planet and its people. And with that in mind, I think everything that we do, we measure against that purpose, and it aligns perfectly with the subject of sustainability, and integrity naturally flows into that, because everything that we want to do, we want to do for the right reasons, because it's the right thing to do. So initially, my title was Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at the company, and then when we changed the values of the company and the purpose back in 2017, 2018, we took the opportunity to change my title from compliance to integrity, because we wanted to have a more positive kind of view on it. And then also because it kind of links not just with bribery and corruption, anti-competition, antitrust, but it goes across health and safety. It goes across how we operate within our projects, everything that we do, as we look at tax, as we look at human rights, all the environmental kind of things, all how our projects impact our clients, and of course the stakeholders in the communities outside of that. It's all about doing the right thing. So I think it's been really great to, over the years, work with our business, with our risk function, to make sure that we build into and not have separate kind of processes, but build into the existing systems that we have. When we do bid on a project, when we do go through our bidding stages, approval process, that we think about things not just through an integrity lens, not just through a sustainability lens, but also through a purpose lens, so to say. My role sits within the legal department, but it's an independent function. I report directly to the board, to the Governance, Ethics and Sustainability Committee, to the chair of that. I report to them on a quarterly basis. I have in-camera sessions with the committee as well, and my reporting includes not just integrity, but also sustainability. And then on an annual basis, I do an annual sustainability strategic report to the whole board, to kind of give an overview of what we've achieved over the year and what we are going to focus on in the upcoming year.
Excellent. Couple of things just to follow up on that. One is this the in-camera sessions with the board. That has a very specific purpose. The purpose of that being in camera, and just to be clear, which means it's just you and the board. It's no one else. So you can potentially say things that you wouldn't say in front of others, that sort of thing. But that strikes me as being a very key process innovation that you have in terms of the decision-making process within Atkins Realis on compliance integrity issues. So can you just expand a little bit on that?
Sure. I think the whole idea around the in-camera sessions, exactly as you say, is to be able to have those frank discussions with the board without any of the company management involved. So the secretary, the CEO, who's part of the board, they leave the meeting, and it's really to help support a chief compliance officer, chief integrity officer, as it relates to their independence for the company, so they can't be bullied or manipulated by management in order to say or to agree to things that they feel that they don't have to. Typically, I wouldn't have anything to say to them that wouldn't be a surprise to the CEO. That's the ideal, working assumption. But it is there in case, there is issues that I need to bring up that I would not feel comfortable in bringing up with our CEO. But typically, everything that we have encountered over the last 10 years that I have been here, I have been able to sort out, figure out together with management. And typically in the in-camera sessions, the board also makes sure that I'm comfortable from a budgetary perspective, from a resource perspective, that I have enough resources and budget to perform my function.
So there's a metaphor that I like to use about a lightning rod on the top of, for example, a barn. The lightning rod is there, and a lot of people think, well, it's not doing any good. I've never seen lightning hit that lightning rod, so I guess you really didn't need that lightning rod. And that really doesn't explain what the lightning rod does. The lightning rod decreases the likelihood of there being lightning hitting that barn. I'm thinking in a way just the fact that you have that in-camera ability sends a message to everybody else that Henty has the capacity to just directly speak when you over there in HR or you over there in some other part who might want to kind of suppress a particular point that Henty is making, you have to know that he has an independent capability to speak directly to the board. Is it something like that? And have you had any opportunity so far to particularly use it in that kind of capacity where you need to speak separately and apart from everybody else? Or is it just more at that emergency level, like a lightning rod on the top?
No, it's a standard every quarter. I've got my 5 to 10 minutes in camera session that we actually use. So it's not there just for an emergency, because I think that becomes a little bit more difficult, because then if you suddenly want to have an in camera session, then everybody's going to ask, who, what does he want to say? So we've got a standard in camera session with the committee every quarter. Myself and the general counsel actually also has her own in camera session with the board, so that it's just part and parcel of how we manage and communicate with the board, and also from a committee perspective, how they can show from a good governance perspective that they have a regular kind of cadence in terms of discussing these topics.
Excellent. Zachar, over to you.
Yeah, I really like that metaphor, that lightning rod metaphor, because I think it also speaks to guardrail functions like compliance, because there's a tendency, like for example, if somebody makes a sale, it's a big deal in the company. There's celebrations, there's probably cake, all these things are going on, and that really is a marker of success. But in guardrail functions like compliance, it seems to me that the marker of success is when nothing happens, right? And I wonder whether you're you have to continuously make the case for integrity again and again. Hey, nothing happened. That's actually a good sign, because there's an entire infrastructure at play here at work, and it's a sign that it's working. So that's one question I wanted to pose to you. The other question is that when you compare, I really like the shift when you're talking about, and it was very deliberate, between from compliance and then towards integrity. And I wonder, compared to your Siemens days, when now you're a head office and you're having these conversations, but now you're speaking the language of integrity, did you notice anything different with respect to how the message is delivered, and also how the message is received?
Sure. So on the second one first, we did see a difference. In some cases, it might have been a little bit too not to the benefit to us as a function, because as soon as you talk about doing the right thing, it crosses across a much wider range of governance areas, and people would come to us with much larger questions that might not have been specifically just within our core subject matter expertise areas as it relates to bribery, corruption, sanctions, and human rights, and those kind of things. But I think it allows it. That's the one part of it. But I think we manage it by being that outlet that people can come to. We oversee our speak up system. We get all the allegations and we review that on a weekly basis together with other functions. So in a sense, I think we do play a role in making sure that if somebody feels, and that's our messaging from a communication perspective, that if they feel that they see something that doesn't feel right, whatever that might be, is please let us know, and we'll make sure that it gets the necessary attention. To your first part of your question around the, I call them gatekeepers almost, because we do have a role as it relates to to being gatekeepers in the organization. And I forgot now exactly what you were asking in the first question, Zaka.
Don't go ahead, Tiger.
Well, it's the difference between the dynamics in a sales environment versus a compliance environment. Because in the sales environment, suppose you landed a big deal, there's a big deal. You know, there's cake, there's
Yes.
ribbons, there's all this stuff.
Oh, to
And
make the
that,
case. Yes,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah, to
yeah.
make the case of it. I think, when everything goes well, if everything goes right, people tend to think, okay, but why do we need you until something goes wrong, and then you can't do your investigation quick enough in order to get to that. So yes, I think it's an ongoing discussion that we always have, specifically within this organization now, because we've been at it for more than 13 years. Is that just because everything is going right doesn't mean we suddenly need only half amount of people. And our board has been actually really proactive around that, is to make sure that even post monitorships and all those things, that we don't suddenly have a knee-jerk reaction and say, oh, everything's going right, so we don't need an integrity function anymore. Actually, on the contrary, we're working a lot harder, especially on the communication and training side, because we are growing at such a great pace. And if you look at our share price, it's exponentially been growing because the company's been doing so well. So it just ups the ante for us in terms of making sure that all the new people coming on board, new markets where we might be going into, that we do equip our people to not forget about, hey, there's bad people out there. They're going to try and get or manipulate you when you go to a specific country or try to do a specific kind of transaction. And that's why it's so important that we are there as a team. So I've never had that problem. I think management understands that. But sometimes you do get the comments, right? That, oh, everything's going right. So, do we still need this policy, or do we still need this control? Yeah, actually we do, because that's what's keeping us safe.
And some people want to play Jenga with
Yeah,
compliance and
exactly.
integrity.
Exactly.
Well, we'll talk more about this later, but the role of external bodies are very important to any company. External bodies covers obviously the entire gamut, from competitors, peers, through to communities, through to NGOs and governments, and so on. But I'm thinking, for example, I know that Atkins Relis has received a very good thumbs up from Ethisphere, which is an external organization that essentially does some form of evaluation. You can unpack exactly what that evaluation is, but do you use that as the equivalent cake ceremony within the company to kind of show, we're getting not only positive news from the sales department, but positive news from those who are reviewing our guardrails?
I think that's one of them, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So the Ethisphere verification is something that we wanted an external kind of verifier, especially post the things that happened in the past. And we had independent monitors for quite a long time, which kind of gave us that independent review, but that came to an end a couple of years ago already. So we wanted to continue with having some sort of external view verification that, hey, what you are doing, you're actually doing a great job, and it's being tagged and viewed and benchmarked against the world's most ethical companies that Ethisphere does. And it's quite a robust process that they go through. It takes more than 3 months, going through all our documents, speaking to a lot of people, including board members, to understand exactly the governance around the integrity program, and how the board thinks about it, and how management thinks about it, and how employees sees it. So that's one part of it, and that's something that we would continue going forward, have some sort of external assurance every couple of years. The other piece, what makes us comfortable, is an employee engagement survey that we do on an annual basis, because the success of an integrity or compliance program pretty much lies in the hands of the employees on how easily they speak up, how safe they feel in being able to speak up when they see things. So our employee engagement survey that we do every year, we focus on a couple of specific questions as it relates to, do you feel safe to speak up? Do you even know that there is a speak up line that you can use? And do you think, or do you fear retaliation when you speak up? And we kind of measure that, and we link that to our incentive bonus structure for our management to make sure that something that we started years ago was expecting our managers to talk personally about integrity matters. And we even threw in sustainability in there at some point as well, because we find that as soon as a manager makes himself vulnerable, talk about personal experiences, people see that and they can more easily speak back to their manager or say, hey, now that you mentioned that, I saw that somewhere over there. Was that the right thing to do? So really focusing on showing managers as vulnerable increases the trust really between employees and managers, and which makes for a safer speak up culture, which we then measure through this engagement survey, which has really been helpful. So those are the two key areas that we keep focusing on to make sure that there isn't any issues that we're not aware of, or specific regions or managers in a specific region where it might not be looking as good, that we can start asking the questions, why is that? Is it the manager, or is it just us not equipping the managers good enough? Is the employees not receiving enough communication? And then kind of following up on that.
You have your rules, which is the compliance side of what it is you do. You've got your policies on bribery and corruption and ethics and that sort of thing. And then you've got the integrity side of things. I'm just going to drill down a little bit on the integrity side of things, in the sense of there are situations where you could not, anyone in Atkins Realis or you individually could not have anticipated this or that particular scenario happening. And since you don't have a rule on it, then the employee, perhaps just on the spot, is put into the position of, what do I do? What do I do when there isn't a precise rule? And my thought was, and this is why I want to hear you out on this, is that one of the areas where the values integrity side of it becomes critically important, because that is there to guide in the space between where you do have a specific rule. When you see this, do this. But what about those situations where you don't have a specific rule like that? Is that where part of the way in which integrity plays a role?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a short bullet point kind of questions that we get employees that they can kind of ask themselves if they come into a situation. And I know the integrity office of Rio Tinto here in Montreal as well, and they recently rolled out their own principles as well that they gave to their employees. If you do get into a situation and you're really unsure, post you looking at the policies and procedures, if you kind of answer these questions for yourself, and you feel it's still the right thing to do, then go ahead and do it, because that means nobody's afterwards going to come and say you did something intentionally wrong. So we try to get employees to understand that as long as they don't intentionally try to do something wrong, and it's not something that's illegal, it's not something that's going to get us up on the front page of the news, that it aligns with the laws and regulations, typically, and the policies and procedures, they should be able to do that. So it becomes much more of a values-based kind of program that we're running versus a rules-based program that we have. The rules that we have is rather built into systems, so it automatically takes care of when it needs to happen, be it through our payment processes, our bidding processes, our gift and hospitality processes. We don't expect the employees to remember all the rules. It should automatically happen. We're focusing a lot more on training and awareness creation around the value system and how we expect them to operate, and have what's that gut feeling that they need to have when they get into situations, and then when they get into those situations, how should they think about solving them.
Over to you, Zachar.
I really like the point you made about the employee survey, Hinty. And it seems to me that what you're trying to do with among your managers is create a space for respectful dialogue and an openness. And do you find, being a multinational corporation, that it's easier to do in some places than in others? That you have to jump through a lot more hoops to be able to convince people from different backgrounds, in different parts of the world, that you can do this and you can do it without fear of reprisals, and you can, So, do you find that?
In order to speak up, yes, definitely from a cultural perspective, it does differ from region to region, especially in regions where you've got a very hierarchical kind of setup, where people, kind of grow up, not questioning their elders, or somebody more senior. So there is, in some cases, a lot more work that needs to be done. We also, and have to be really careful that, managers, and that's why the focus is so much on managers, is that you have then the right managers in those regions, because the wrong manager in a region where you already have that fear of speaking up because of cultural norms, that creates a hotspot of potential future issues that you could or can have. On the manager side of things, as soon as you put a requirement in as part of a bonus or incentive structure, it's amazing how easy it is to get them to do something. The only piece on that is sometimes they battle a bit with the messaging, and then they would come to us, and we would work together with them, or with their communication partners, to kind of help them, because as engineers, we're not Shakespeare's, so we're not always good with words. But every manager has bought into that process of actually talking about ethical moments or ethical issues or conundrums that they've seen, and that's made a huge difference in how employees then see them as their manager, and making it just easier for them to speak about it.
Speaking of cultures, there's the culture of that country where, for example, deference is very, very strong way of behaving in that particular culture, which is different than another. But then even within Atkins Rails or any particular corporation, you end up with, I would suggest, different cultures. For example, the sales group within a company oftentimes has a different culture. They view each other differently, and they view their role in the company differently than does, for example, the people in the HR department or in the legal department or what have you, the guardrail side of things. So a couple of things I want to just kind of hear you out on is one is you inherited through the combination of the three companies, Atkins, F&B, and SNC Lavalin, you inherited, in a way, different cultures, literally different organizational decision-making structures from those three different organizations that were then melded into one. And I imagine that is must have been, and probably even continues to be, an area where culture issues have to be continually calibrated and addressed and modified, as the case might be. But then secondly, a technique that I know Siemens used was to have an ambassador in the sales department who was a salesperson, but they have been kind of designated as the point person within the sales department for interacting with your sort of department, the integrity and compliance department. So can you just unpack a little bit how this culture angle worked when you merged three companies into one, and then these other related cultural issues?
So from the acquisition days with Atkins and SNC, it was actually very complementary. And the SNC of the heyday doesn't really exist anymore. SNC Lavalin is only, the only remnants of that is really the Canada business that we have, and then a small minerals and metals business in Latin America that does very specific work for specific mining companies. But the international SNC Lavalin business that was all over the world is no more. It doesn't exist anymore. We don't do that kind of business. So globally, anybody that you see working for Atkins Realis is really a legacy, either Atkins or F&G employee that works in those countries. So there was never really a big kind of cultural shift or change that was needed between the different sales organizations, because as a company, we completely de-risk ourselves. We exited from countries where we didn't understand the business or where we had to rely on third-party agents, which got the company into trouble in the past. And we really just focused on where we know how to do business through and focus on the types of business and markets that we know. So the UK and Ireland business that we have works in UK and Ireland. The Canada business works in Canada. The US works in the US. So we have very cross-border kind of business, which goes back to the whole geopolitical, arena, as we're not really affected as much as it relates to tariffs or sanctions, because we do work inside the countries. And then from a culture perspective, it's just always been an easy way to work with that. And I forgot your second part of your question, Gunningham.
So the ambassador.
The ambassador, yeah. So
Yeah.
of course, I brought over the whole ambassador program, and we have about 150 integrity ambassadors across the company globally, embedded into all different locations and functions, and they are our fingers and hands into the organization. So they don't have to have a lot of integrity officers, because a lot of the stuff that we have to focus on is the communication, the training and awareness, which we can do with somebody that we have nominated. And it's a closed loop as well, because we push information to them, and then our integrity officers in the different regions are able to speak to them again as well and get feedback from them from a business perspective. And on the sustainability side, we took a similar kind of approach, that for each, because of corporate sustainability, focused on the strategy and reporting, but we need to work with each region. So for each region, we kind of appointed a lead, which is kind of an ambassador from a sustainability perspective, because they've got a day job. And through them, because every region is a little bit different, we are able to manage, to communicate, and to get different regions to focus on what's important for them in their region as it relates to us as a company and the business that we do.
You mentioned de-risking, that you exited certain regions because the risk was too high, which is a strategy I've seen other companies do as well. Agnico Eagle, for example, a Canadian mining company, just says, we're not going to these countries because there's too much, fill in the blanks, X, Y, or Z, whatever that too much might be. There's civil strife, or there is a lot of corruption, or whatever. Everybody's got their own cutoff point. So that's interesting that you have that you de-risked when you join together as one. Also, you mentioned third-party agents. Again, some companies have gone so far as to just say, we're not going to use them anymore. They perform a very valuable role because they're kind of like tourist agents in that region. They know the local environment and so on. But yes, they can be compromised, and it's much harder to track and control them. So could you talk a little bit more about that de-risking process? It sounds like there are no-go countries, and it sounds like you came to some conclusions with respect to third-party agents. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So from the de-risking perspective, in the past, when we looked at where countries and where to do business and what approval levels you would need, we only looked at security, so physical security, and bribery and corruption risk. So those two kind of factors, then with some kind of gave us go, no go kind of areas or escalated approval levels. About 5 years ago, we amended that, and we added other issues like the ease of doing business in countries, the commercial kind of risk associated of doing business in those countries, the rule of law, and that's probably the most important one in my eyes, because if you have the right people doing the right thing in a country, even if it's very corrupt, you can still do business there. But the biggest problem is if you do business in a country where the legal system isn't mature, the rule of law isn't good enough, the problem is that you might find yourself when you get into a dispute or you're not getting paid, that you've got no legal recourse in order to get your money back or to get paid. So that's probably the biggest risk for us, and how we look at where to do business, where the money flows from, whether we would pursue business or not. Because in the end, we're a business, we want to make money. And if we're not sure that we can go after money and in disputes, or even just get paid, that's probably the biggest blocker for us. So we've got a pretty well set out rule system, again, all automated in the background, for the business, and they know where they need to focus on and where they shouldn't focus on, which makes it much easier for us to focus on our business, specific business areas in region.
So did that mean like a huge swath of countries became countries we no longer do work in, or was it really just a kind of around the edges, minor fine tuning?
There's a couple that's clear no go, and it's typically sanction related, and then anything else depends on whether we would have to have people on the ground or not. A lot of the work that we do, we're no longer a construction company, we're engineering services company, so we're more of a professional services company. So a lot of work that we do is work that we can do behind a desk from anywhere in the world. So we do find ourselves that we do still go in and do work for higher risk jurisdictions, but it's typically for clients in lower risk jurisdictions, or we get paid from a lower risk jurisdiction for that work that we do in the higher risk jurisdiction. So it's because it's tabletop kind of work or services that we do for multilateral development banks and things like that. So it's not a decisive list, but it's a list that helps us kind of navigate. But it only helps us navigate on the outer lying areas, because our strategy and where we want to grow is quite clear within the business, and that's where the main focus is.
Just the second question I asked was with respect to third-party agents.
Yes.
So do you no longer use third-party agents?
We do not. So if we need to go into a country and the only way of getting business in that country is through a third-party agent, then it's a no. We don't do that. In the past, in the Middle East, you always had to have sponsors in order to do business, or a local partner. That legislation has changed a lot. So that was probably the area where we had the most business partners, which they're not really third-party agents. They're more just a partner for you. But even that is becoming less and less. So no, we don't have third-party agents that we pay commissions for in order to help us get business in countries. It's just too risky for us.
Over to you, Zachar.
Yeah, that's a good segue into my question regarding risks and geopolitical issues, because there's been, over the past few years, there's been a lot of disruptions around the world. Of course, in the United States, but also hotspots around the world: Middle East, the Arctic, Asia Pacific, and in that sense, given so much has changed in the relatively short span of time, what has that meant for Atkins Realis, both in terms of risks and opportunities? And I guess the follow-up question to that is, from a compliance and integrity perspective, what role should the compliance or integrity function play in helping organizations adapt while maintaining the standards that you're trying to maintain?
Sure. Yeah, and I kind of alluded to that earlier, is that because we work in specific regions and not a lot across regions, the whole geopolitical kind of landscape, tariffs, sanctions, hasn't had that big of an influence for us. Canada business does business in Canada. The US does business in the US, the UK in the UK. We do a lot of cross collaboration internally to support, because we've got subject matter experts on different market areas, and we do support globally, but we execute locally. So we haven't really had that much of an exposure from that perspective. But I do sit on quite a number of global kind of initiatives, and share best practices with other chief integrity officers and other chief sustainability officers. And the message, especially from a US global company's perspective, is in some instances they're actually doubling down on how much effort they have, and a lot of efforts more on communication and training, because their staff is global and everybody is global. So, and with the FCPA, that's got different priorities. In some areas in the world, the thought process is that that it's open season in terms of bribery and corruption, and that's not the case. So, because there's a lot of other legal systems that look after multinational companies. So, a lot of work for us and for any big multinational company, wherever you are, and what's been discussed at various forums, is we have to focus on equipping our staff as to how to react when they do get into those situations. So a lot more focus on case studies and on equipping them to know how to answer, what to do when they get into a specific situation. That's been a lot bigger focus. But for us, that's basically it. Nothing more than that.
I definitely want to turn our attention to this. I'm going to call it the broader ecosystem in which regulatory ecosystem in which you operate, you and all companies operate, in a moment. But first, maybe you could just unpack a little bit the world in which AtkinsRéalis lives in is one where your main likely partners are going to be either development banks, I would suggest, the World Bank or equivalent regional versions, or governments. And there's going to be some direct doing engineering services for the private sector, but I'm sensing that the vast majority of work at first instance is going to be with governments or with these international aid agencies that provide a lot of funding, the World Bank types and regional ones. But is that correct? Do I have that correct in terms of
only partially. I think the most of our work comes from government and public organizations globally. The multilateral development bank, international, those things are 0.001% of our business. It's not a lot that we do with them. Our biggest work is with the governments within the different countries where we kind of operate. Of course, there are private clients as well. But the majority of our work is within the various countries. The US, it's more on state level, but there is some federal work as well. In Canada, we're working on quite a lot of these big federal projects that's coming out, and again also on municipal and regional, provincial level. The UK a lot is governmental kind of work, and the Middle East by design is mostly governmental kind of. We see it as governmental kind of work in the various regions.
Just a little bit of elaboration on that. I know that a major constraint on SNC-Lavalin was the restrictions by the World Bank. You were not allowed as SNC-Lavalin to engage in contracts with them. And I got the impression, and I thought there was some others as well, some other multilateral banks where there was, again, restrictions put on. But I got the impression that those were quite a significant thing that you wanted to, end as quickly as possible. But you're saying 0.001 of is that, so does that represent a shift in who your clientele are since those old days, or
no? Yeah, it's an interesting story, because when we did agree when SNC-Lavalin back in the day agreed with the World Bank to sign on to the debarment agreement, because we weren't sanctioned, they decided let's sign this together. It was, I think it was 1 or 2% of the then SNC-Lavalin turnover that we did related to multilateral development bank kind of work. So it wasn't very big. So I think that was also why, as a company, the decision was made. It's not a lot of, it doesn't make a big percentage out. Let's show that we want to make a change, because the company did want to make a change, and they wanted to show how serious they was with that. So the then CEO with the World Bank signed on to that debarment agreement. Why we wanted it to end quicker, and we did get early release after 8 years back in I think it was 2018 or something like that, or 2019, was because reputationally, having hundreds of legal entities on a debarment list on the World Wide Web, and as companies matured in terms of their due diligence processes, it became more and more of an issue to kind of keep on explaining, yes, we're on those lists, but this happened, 10 years ago. We're a reformed company. You should actually be, we're the best company to kind of deal with. So it was more a managerial time and effort to kind of keep on explaining, and reputationally having to spend time on it, rather than having an impact, on the bottom line.
Well, that's an excellent point. And one I think we should all keep in mind is that a seemingly small sting in the form of what contracts you can go to is not necessarily the most important part of that debarment process. It is the reputational damage which spreads far beyond the immediate amount of work you're going to do, because it's almost like having a mark on your forehead that you always have to explain before you get around to doing anything else. Oh yeah, that was from before. We don't do that
Yeah.
anymore.
And
Yeah,
especially in
yeah.
especially in the consulting environment, Königin,
Mhm.
Siemens to a lesser respect, because they had great products. It's the Rolls Royce of products, so people wanted the best, so they kept on
Yeah.
buying the best. Within the consulting or professional services kind of sphere, it becomes a reputation is everything. So it
Yeah.
becomes a much bigger kind of a thing that you have to kind of drag together with you, into the future.
Well, our conversation is naturally going in this direction anyway, so this fits very well with that. Let's talk about that external operating environment, which is constantly changing, and that's just a reality of business in the 21st century. But I see you in your activities. You're involved, for example, in the OECD work, just to be clear to everybody around, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is a bringing together of normally quite wealthy countries that have signed a treaty dealing with bribery and corruption, but also are doing sort of ongoing work to ensure that countries are meeting their treaty obligations and so on. So I know that there's a business industry advisory committee of OECD, and I understand that you're playing a part there. Then there's the United Nations, and they've got their Global Compact, which has got the anti-bribery element, and that's another kind of a forum where you could be playing a role, or perhaps are playing a particular role. Then within Canada, you've mentioned, your conversations with Rio Tinto and other partners, others in similar, doing similar work in other companies. So you've got those different multi-level external bodies that you're dealing with. And then you have, for example, extremely influential governments like the United States government, which has taken a somewhat a step back, I guess we could say, and I'll leave it just ambiguous with respect to its FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and the pause on American companies and so on. So the sort of different treatment. Let's go easy on the American companies and that sort of thing. How are these sorts of external factors playing on your role and what AtkinsRéalis does in terms of addressing these issues?
So the short answer is it hasn't changed anything as it relates to how we operate. And the funny story is, in most cases, if you speak to any leading company that takes ethics and compliance seriously and sees that as a focus area to be as a sustainable project a customer or a company as possible, they haven't deviated from their compliance programs. I do, however, I know of one or two companies that had cases against them being investigated, which got dropped, and then suddenly their compliance teams found themselves out on the street, unfortunately.
Really?
But in most all the companies that I've interacted with, as you said, I'm co-chair at the BIAC, the business at OECD, Integrity and Anti-Corruption Activity, and at the OECD itself, there's an anti-corruption leaders hub that they created a number of years ago, which we meet every March. And in all these sessions, it's all everything is going ahead, and that's kind of where the best practice sharing always happens, and where we have discussed that we are doubling down actually in terms of the communication and training on what needs to happen. There has been a lot of good work that has come out of some of these organizations as well, a lot of white papers and policy papers reminding business why it's important not to forget, or to that compliance and ethics and compliance programs and integrity officers are important within their companies, that to kind of help companies that do struggle in making that point, to help them with that. But in most cases, I think everybody understands, and it's business as usual, because if it's not, if you built your compliance program just because of the FCPA, then you didn't do a good job, because you shouldn't be building a program around one law. You should be building a program because it's the right thing to do, and that's how you want to do business. And by the way, there's other UK, there's a lot of other areas and countries in the world that do still enforce around bribery and corruption. So if one's not going to catch you, the other one is. So you have to be really, really serious within a company that does global work to do the right thing and still have that in place. And I shared, maybe we can share it with the people, is at the BIAC. They've got a zero corruption manifesto that was published about a year ago or so, that really kind of challenges the world and companies to pursue, as part of the SDGs, one additional SDG which focuses on let's get to a place where there's zero corruption.
Very interesting that you would see some companies that the minute they were not kind of directly under the thumb of investigation or enforcement action, be that pursuant to the US FCPA or otherwise, would immediately just sort of drop their compliance department, because I appreciate that. I think the vast majority of companies start from the proposition, let's just comply with the law. It's the simplest, easiest thing for us to do in terms of maintaining our license to operate at a very practical level. But I'm kind of it really shows that there is another set of companies, and those are the not very good companies, that the instant you take the pressure away from them, they will behave that way. And people do talk in the compliance world about how you have to have different, and when I say compliance world, the government enforcement compliance world, how you have to have a different approach for your laggards than you do for example, your leaders, and your with the work that you're doing, best practices and signing manifestos and so on. That's on the other side of that hill, so to speak. But it is fascinating to hear how there'd be an immediate impact like that. And I know there's Zachary's got a question, and Zachary, I'm going to get to you in a second here. But if we could talk for a second about how the nature of bribery and corruption as a regulated activity has changed in the sense of, it used to be the US show, and everybody else, all other countries were way down, way down in terms of the amount of attention they're addressing to that issue. But largely because of the United States insisting that there be a treaties, OECD and otherwise. You saw UK, France, Canada to some extent kind of pull up their socks. And yes, I take your point that now, even when the United States pulls back, there are other governments that have not pulled back. And so that continued signaling of this is unacceptable activity carries on. And to some extent, the United States can fall back. They now are in a position where falling back by them doesn't mean falling back on the overall signal being sent to industry, which is you need to address bribery and corruption. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts about that evolving story with bribery and corruption. It used to be the United States dog and pony show, and it's not now. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because others have moved up. Is that your impression as well, or
Yes,
what are your
yeah,
thoughts?
yeah, exactly. And for example, Brazil has done a lot as well. I've been in a couple of sessions where somebody from Brazil has kind of shed light and how they're thinking about things. France is also really progressive in how they think about stuff. But I think the world is evolving, and bribery corruption is one of many topics. I think that through the last decade, I would say, as kind of is bubbling up in terms of importance. Bribery corruption will always be there, but we suddenly now have cybersecurity. There's a big focus on modern slavery globally. Something that's keeping us busy at the moment is AI and the ethical use of AI, and
Yeah.
thinking about, as a company, how do we make sure that the sandbox that we give our engineers to play in has some sort of guardrails in place, and also how do we think about selling AI solutions, and who do we sell it to, and what type of solutions we sell, and how comfortable we feel with that. So that's something that we're currently busy formulating and putting into processes and procedures to kind of look at that. So I think the world is evolving, not for the worse, but actually because everybody's sustainability. There was a whole big race around reporting, and all these different reporting frameworks, be it CSRD or ISSP. That has slowed down a bit, but it hasn't gone away, which I think has kind of given companies the opportunity to take a step back and say, okay, we still want to show or disclose what's important to us, what is really important to us, what policies, procedures, governance frameworks do we have in place, and focus on that, and getting that out into their organization. So I'm not saying that the slowdown is a good thing, but I'm also not saying that it's a bad thing, because I think it is helping companies to kind of reassess and get ready. Whereas with the huge, we weren't under the CSRD kind of requirements, but with some of the World Economic Forum groups that I'm in, I did see that some of the global chief sustainability officers for global companies were really struggling, and they put a lot of effort and money into just conforming to those kind of reporting requirements just for the sake of reporting, and not really making a difference, of thinking about, hey, if we change our packaging this way, it's actually going to make us more sustainable, and we're going to report on that, rather than just reporting for the sake of reporting.
Right. Well, let's do a future session on AI when you have had an opportunity to work that out. I know every country, every university, every company, and individuals, we're all trying to navigate the world of AI and what's the correct thing to do and so on. So let's circle back on that one some other time to hear how things are going there. That's certainly a very fascinating topic. I'm going to just add in a phrase for now, and that phrase is hostages of each other. We're going to come back to hostages of each other as a concept in a minute, but I want to pass things over to Zachary, because I know you had a hot pursuit question there.
Just a couple very quick ones. So, Henty, I know that you are involved in all sorts of national and international forums where you get to meet people from the compliance function, but also CEOs, policymakers, researchers. And I'm curious, when you have these kinds of interactions, is there Is there any sort of realization that bubbled up to the surface about, what are people missing about when they're in their current understanding or analysis of compliance and integrity? What are they getting right? What do they misunderstand? What do they misunderstand? And what kinds of analytical research work that you would like to see more of on when it comes to compliance and integrity? What are they
Yeah,
missing?
yeah. Yeah, let me think about what are we missing. Something that has come out in some of the groups that I've been in is and it's something that a gentleman called Klaus Musmeyer, he was actually part of Siemens as well.
Mm.
He went to Novartis and he's now a board member of Deutsche Bank. Came up with a concept of assurance and getting and having a much greater working together within companies as it relates to assurance functions. Because what we find is that the risk function sits in one area, the audit function sits in another area, the compliance function sits in another area. So there's lots of different silos, and in our company we have a project oversight function that reviews projects from an operational perspective and a lot of companies and then sustainability reporting, and everybody's working in silos. So what Novartis did really, really well was kind of combining a lot of those assurance functions under one leadership, which was Klaus, and that really enabled them to have a much better grasp on the risks and opportunities for them as a company, and reduce a lot of duplication of effort. So I think that's something that we'll see going forward. More boards and more companies kind of think about. And it's actually, even if you are working in silos, a quick fix is really just to have regular interactions with the different risk functions to make sure that you are talking the same language. And that might be, an area of further analysis for companies. Is everything synchronized as good as it can be between the various risk areas? When ESG, started, the first question that we got from the board is, okay, what's our ESG risks? And we looked at our material areas, and we looked at the risk matrix, and we realized that we don't have to have a specific risk that says this is our ESG risk. All our ESG risks is already kind of there, because they are, the ones that's material and that's going to have the biggest impact on the company. If we didn't have them on our risk register, we would have been doing something wrong. So
Mhm.
the biggest thing that we did was actually just reformulate or link the ones that we saw that was linking back to what's our biggest focus areas from a sustainability perspective, so that we can, if somebody asks us, so what's your ESG risks, we can say, okay, these are the ones, but they're all over the place within the risk register, because they belong to different governance owners. So I think, from a compliance perspective, ethics compliance perspective, the code of conduct, that companies have as a function, we are the gatekeeper for that document, but we don't own the document in terms of all content, because you've got different governance owners. You've got HR, you've got security, IT security, you've got physical security, you've got various aspects of the company that talks in the code of conduct. This is how we expect our employees to behave. So I'm not sure that in all companies that kind of consensus or close working relationship between those various governance owners is always as it should be and where it should be.
Final question. My apologies, Ursula, but I have to ask this one. Do you worry, Henty, about, because you are now in a senior position at a Canadian multinational, and when you look at, do you worry about the talent pipeline when it comes to compliance and integrity? Because there are some functions where it's a very clean escalator, right? Whether you're talking about law or accounting or anything like that, it's very, very clear. You come in, this is what you learn, and you come out, and these are the positions you get hired in. And of course, compliance is going to be different industry to industry, from company to company. But when you're thinking about the next generation of compliance leaders, is that talent pipeline something you worry about? Are companies and universities producing the kinds of people that you would feel comfortable? Yeah, you know what? I'm ready to hand over my responsibilities to this new crop of professionals.
Yes, 10 years ago I would have said no, but nowadays there's it's much easier to find a compliance officer, or in any part of the world actually, that understands ethics and compliance programs, understands the laws, understands what a program looks like, because I think there's a lot more companies globally that kind of have implemented that over the past decade, and I think there's a lot more from a tertiary institution kind of perspective, universities and so forth, that is focusing and providing kind of education around the topic. So yeah, it's much easier nowadays. 10 years ago, it was really really difficult to find people. Now it's not becoming commoditized. I think that there's still subject matter experts, but there's a lot more out there that you can choose from.
Well, certainly, we're trying to do our bit here at
Yes,
Toronto
yeah,
Metropolitan
exactly.
University, but it is also the case that there's the engineering stream, there's the law stream, there's the accounting stream, and I do think that no matter which stream you happen to come up of those three, and there are others, HR stream, for example, now as part of the education side of things back at universities, there is a compliance integrity component built into a lot of those, however inadequate it might be. But that's a change from where it's been in the past. My final point, going back to this hostages of each other idea, that's an expression that somebody came up with a long time ago to describe nuclear, and I know you're in the nuclear industry, but it was to describe nuclear reactor companies and how in the United States, if any one nuclear reactor had some sort of a mishap, safety related mishap, everyone else, all the other nuclear reactors knew that the next day they were going to be hit with new requirements, new standards. Let's do another audit. Let's do another regulatory review and so on. We're all hostages of each other here. So therefore, the theory goes, we all need to work together to ensure that none of us end up into any sort of trouble, because if any of us end up in trouble, then we will all be tainted with the same brush of we're bad. So I mentioned that in light of your comment that you had some companies in the United States that you knew of, that the minute they were not the subject of compliance investigations and so on, they just dropped their entire grouping of people within the company that were responsible for that issue. Does that concern you? Because those companies are basically going to be companies that someone is going to say, they're all bad. You see, look at that company over there, got into that bribery and corruption problem. They're all bad. And there you are, put in the position of saying, no, that's not the case. Atkins Realis is an excellent, look at our great processes and so on. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on how do you combat that issue?
Well, so the company that I was referring to was actually not a US company, but they were under a US enforcement action. But that's the only one that I know of, and the only reason why I know of that is because I had people that was let go kind of contact me and say, hey, is there
No
role
longer there.
no longer there. So I think that I wouldn't be too concerned about that. My biggest issue or request almost from a Canada perspective is that from a Canada side of things, there needs to be more guidance around enforcement and around guidance around what programs should look like and how everything works, like the FCPA or the US always had in terms of the DOJ kind of guidance documents and things like that. I think Canada is a bit of a laggard, and I've said this public, and I don't mind saying it publicly, because I think, yes, there was enforcement around the then SNC-Lavalin back in the day, but surely there must have been others as well, but we haven't seen enough. So if you don't see enough enforcement, if you don't see enough remediation agreements, companies can't learn out of that, and I think companies want that guidance in order to be able to have a clear route of if something does happen, what do we do? How do we defend this? How does everything kind of work? So and some of the other countries up to Brazil. Great example of how they've kind of, from an enforcement perspective, start working with companies, explaining to them what's expected, and just having a much closer kind of relationship, which we don't see enough of, I think, in Canada, unfortunately.
Well, I think that's a terrific point. And maybe just to connect things, to wrap things up here, I see, and I know I'm not alone in saying this, that there could be a very considerable positive role that could be played by AI systems to assist in companies in identifying where are problems and issues and so on. That's one thing that AI can do. I'm wondering whether or not you feel as if the Canadian government with partners were to invest in developing tools, AI-related tools, to assist companies in meeting their compliance obligations, bribery and corruption, and beyond. But these would not be, I know that already you probably have people knocking on your door every day from, Price Waterhouse and so on, offering you that. But this would be something that would be developed with, for example, the Canadian government, working with Canadian companies, working with NGOs like Transparency International and so on, Transparency International Canada, to develop those sorts of tools. Would that be the sort of thing, sort of part of that active presence of the Canadian government, in addition to enforcement actions and other things that you'd be supportive of, that sort of thing?
I think so, yeah, and probably more so for the small and medium kind of enterprises, because
Yeah.
in Canada there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Something that comes to mind is all the junior mining companies in Canada.
Yeah.
Is a hotspot for mining companies. They operate in really risky regions.
Yeah.
So that would be beneficial for everybody as it relates to that.
Well, let's see if we can work on that, developing some sort of a Canadian group, combining the unique capabilities of government, the private sector, and civil society. Be good to just have a talk shop like that anyway, virtual talk shop, to share ideas and insights as we deal with this constantly changing environment. But for today, let me just say, on behalf of Toronto Metropolitan University and specifically the CSR Institute, my thanks for you taking the time. And I'd also like to thank Zachar for his excellent questions. For everybody out there, this is the caliber of people who are in that supply chain, very capable, very insightful, who are doing work in this area. So thank you, Zachar, also for your questions. But Henty,
Thank you, Henty.
specifically, thank you so much for taking the time. Looking forward to doing this down the line.
No, super. Thank you very much, Ken. Again, thanks so much, Zach. It's always great to kind of have a discussion, and I always come away with some ideas as well. So appreciate that.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
I should have mentioned that I am a member of Transparency International, their legal committee. I should have mentioned that, but I'm mentioning it now. So you know what they say, disclosure is very important. But here we are. Now, at least I'm saying it now. Anyway, have a
Excellent.
good rest
Bye
of
now. Take
January
care.
and best
Thank
of luck
you.
for the rest of the year. All the best.
Super. Thank